perspective as an Albany business person insider. It's my pleasure to introduce 2008 Corning Award winner and retired state Senate Majority Leader, the Honorable Joseph Bruno. Senator, the floor is yours, and remember, we have golf after this.
You know, I was somewhat detained, and it's so great to be here and congratulate Heather, who's my neighbor and used to work with us in the Senate, and everyone that is part of the board, part of all the good stuff that goes on with the Business Council, and those that are supporters, those were the award winners, and especially my good friend Roger, for his outstanding award and performance here in behalf of New York State and all of the good people that use his products. I was somewhat detained in being here because I ran into a man who wanted to talk to me about a horse. And it turned out to be a total waste of time because we just couldn't agree on a price. But it only took 9 years. But anyway, it's nice to be here. And Father Peter Young, it's good to see you here. And he's a great friend, great supporter of everybody in the universe. And Heather, thank you for mentioning Peter especially, because everybody ought to be aware of what Peter does, how he does it, and what is presently going on in his life. Father, let me just, yes, clap for Peter. I want to just share that prayers do get answered. They do get answered. Now look at me, sitting here with these three people, some of whom tortured me at times, and I couldn't sleep last night, matter of fact, thinking about how I could be somewhat abusive, okay? But being good-natured and of good cheer, and age does that for you. I am going to try like heck to be nice, okay? Now, they were already introduced, and we've said enough about them, so I want...
Stands for. That's got to change. I feel that that was a strategic error on the part of his campaign, because no matter how far ahead you are in the polls or how much money you have in the bank, you at least have to pretend that you're asking for someone's vote.
Great observations.
You never said that when you were majority leader.
You didn't make any great observations. But let's talk about, on this subject, I keep reading and hearing about a Senator Moreland. I don't know who the hell he was. He was long before my time. It's probably a good thing. But a lot of the news about that. And it's sort of out there, and then it's not out there. I mean, is that for real in terms of anything that's going on? Or is it just sort of spinning something out there? Susan, what do you think?
Well, Kenny has done the
Commission. And now Ken is right. We don't know if that's going to be criminal. It seems that it may not be criminal, but it's potentially embarrassing. And exactly what Mr. Barara concludes, how and when he concludes it, I think could have an electoral impact and could have an impact on the discussion of state politics going forward. I think the other question, though, is a significant one, and it's a significant one for probably the people in this room, in that we have, for one of the first times, someone who's really outside of Albany and outside of sort of the state political culture, really looking at aspects of the state political culture that some voters might find unseemly. There are lots of gray lines Some people would say that they're absolutely terrible. Other people would say that they're perfectly acceptable and they are perfectly legal. And this blurred line between what is unlawful, what is lawful, is something that's come up. And a federal prosecutor, you could maybe attest to this, has a very different view of what is permissible and what is not permissible under law. And I think that what might come out of this commission is Mr. Barrara starting to push his view of what is permissible, what is not permissible, with things such as campaign donations, with things such as the use of campaign funds, and sort of pushing that into a culture that has a different view of that. I think there's going to be tension there, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch unfold.
But there's also a question of whether or not this is a federal issue.
Well,
Campaign finance, does that fall under federal guidelines?
Right.
Whether the governor interfered with an investigation by a commission, does that fall into federal? You know, he very may well find that it looks unethical, it doesn't look good, but there's no federal law here. There's no federal standing to go after him.
right, and what are the consequences of that? Why is he doing that? And what will the effect be?
Are you listening? Because here are the people who report the news, right? And they're saying, pretty much, that the feds don't really know what the hell goes on in government in New York State. And that's a fact. They really don't understand it. And you know what's worse? They don't want to understand it. And that's a fact. But you have to hold them accountable. You have to hold them accountable and say what you're saying out loud, because what you're saying is right on. And I had an interesting relationship with the feds. Interesting. You know, there's something that probably the public isn't that aware of. But people who are in elective office and high places in government at all, they are not protected by the laws of libel and slander. Did you know that?
Liar.
Who knew that? Why? I always maintained that that makes people in office second-class citizens. They don't have the same rights that you all have, everybody else has. In fact, I put a bill in the Senate, and I think we passed it, and it never saw daylight in the Assembly, to just make people in elective office equal citizens. Just don't take away their rights. What do you think of that, Jim? Should people in elective office, should they be in any way protected? Because my first campaign, I remember a guy who thought he was a prophet 6 years ago, said, Bruno's a crook. Front page in some paper in Albany, Bruno a crook, alleged by his opponent, small letters. Now, should that be right?
Well, that's an interesting question.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for your answer. And will
Everyone
you
here knows that
advocate?
interesting is the ultimate non-adjective,
Yeah.
right? It means nothing.
Yeah.
No, I disagree with you. If any elected official is essentially going, in this country, going before the citizenry and asking to serve, asking for the privilege of serving. There is nothing that compels you to run for office. There's nothing that compels you to serve in office. Here in this audience, we have former members of the legislature who maybe made this decision about the balancing, because there is inherent in our democracy, I believe, a necessary intrusion into the life of an individual who thrusts himself or herself into the public eye. I think that also fundamental to our democracy is the idea that you have a fourth estate, that you have a press corps that does hold officials accountable. And I think that if an official who perhaps has more monetary resources, perhaps has more governmental power than a news organization, then it would perhaps have a chilling effect on incisive coverage, on commentary, and on criticism. And I'd also say to the opponent who called you a crook, or to me who just called you a liar, that was in tongue-in-cheek, ladies and gentlemen, tongue-in-cheek, but
Oh, that's a good thing.
tongue-in-cheek. But
I'm no longer in public office. And there's lots of lawyers here. Lots of lawyers here.
But you know, and that's
And that
but
was
you did-
true.
But you did take on Pataki, and you did speak your mind, and then you would always make up and bring flowers or do something. But it was different. And I always said one of the things that was interesting about covering Joe Bruno was, of the three men in the room, he was the only non-lawyer, and
Yeah.
and it came across that way in covering him. It came across, he said stuff. He was forthright most of the time, and. But you weren't. It was something, you weren't guarded. You would talk out on different issues. It was hard to get the governor to talk about it. Shelley Silver, he'll talk when he wants to talk, otherwise that's also difficult. But, you would just talk the way people spoke. And I think it made it fun to cover, whether, I'm not saying I agreed politically or not politically, but it was fun to cover.
We knew that whenever you and Shelley went to go get ice cream, that it would be, the budget was coming. It was like gestating, and it was about to happen.
And we did, but it was always the question of who would pay. And that held up the budget for a whole day, for Pete's sake. But, we kid and laugh and can be very serious. But the press really should be, has to be, and I really think is kind of the protector that we have out there, the shield that we all have out there. And whether I ever agreed or disagreed, I always had the greatest respect for the people in the press. And I say that very sincerely, because I don't have to suck up or kiss up to them now, okay? Because they can't hurt me or help me at all, I'm sorry to say. But I thank you for what you did and how you did it. And I lament the case that you weren't there when we were there, but we're making up for it somewhat now. And I really didn't hear that he was wandering down the hall. It was somebody else. But I want to thank you. And I want to thank you all for being such a great audience. And I'm getting the signal we're on time and we're going to go. Thank you.